Today we're talking everything about the hips. You know, your hips don't lie. There are 55,000 hip joint replacements in Canada every year, nearly 9,000 a year in British Columbia alone. So this is the hip joint here. What's amazing about the hip is not only is it supporting all of the upper body and taking on extra weight and force, but it is our main mobility large joint that helps us to walk and run and bend and do everything. So why do we have all these hip joint replacements happening? Well, muscle balance around this hip joint is very complex because the joint moves in so many different directions. So let's go over what some of those issues are. So first of all, you know, we have hip flexion, right? So when we walk forward or when we sit, you know, the big femur bone comes forward, and the muscles that do that come really off of the lower spine here and are very strong and often very tight. Why? Because we tend to sit all day, so we keep our hips in a flexed position quite often. The opposite is hip extension, right? So as you walk and your leg extends behind you, those muscles in behind are the big gluteus muscles, as well as the hamstrings, which will work to, you know, extend that leg backwards. Those muscles tend to be weaker. And I mean, let's face it, if we sit on our butts all day long, that big gluteus maximus muscle is flattened out and not in shape. And so one of the most common muscle imbalances, not for everybody, but commonly, is that we're very tight in the front, very weak in the back. So we really have to work on stretching in the front and strengthening in the behind. Now, the hip joint, of course, is really this ball and socket joint in what's called this acetabulum, which is made out of the three parts of the pelvis, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis, really three fused parts to the pelvis. And so the hip joint, the leg also comes out to the side, and that's called abduction. And it also goes inward, and that's called adduction. And of course, we don't necessarily do those movements a lot on a daily occasion, but realize that those muscles are also helping to stabilize the hip joint in the socket there as we tip and move the entire torso and everything. The other set of directions that the hip does is called internal rotation. So we can turn the whole leg in, and we can turn the whole leg out. Okay, so you can see the in and the out. Now, again, what tends to be a very common muscle imbalance is we tend to be very weak on the lateral or the external rotation of the hip. And so the hip can tend to sit a little bit internally rotated, which of course then keeps a stretch on these posterior muscles. And again, that's all part of the overall muscle imbalance that is happening. And so we need to work on externally rotating or laterally rotating the muscles which do that, which are tiny, small little muscles that come off of the back of the pelvis onto this big femur bone here. And, you know, those exercises are like when you're laying on your side and lifting your leg up and rotating it outwards. And so Exercise is very important to keep the muscles balanced around the hip joint, because if we don't do that, then this big hip joint here is not going to rest properly. It's going to have wear and tear on the ligaments and the cartilage, and you'll end up being one of those 55,000 each year that needs a hip replacement. So let's get out and exercise.